Wesley Boone rode back into Larkspur Gulch with two outlaws tied behind his horse. Folks cheered. The mayor clapped. But when his reward turned out to be twin Apache girls chained and silent, Wesley didn't speak. He untied them, handed over his bread, and walked away. No words. Just a man who saw people, not property. At his quiet ranch, they carved animals from wood eagles, bear's hope in every shape. But not everyone in town wanted them free. When fire hit the barn and lies filled the courtroom, Wesley stood alone until truth arrived on horseback. Will justice be enough to keep peace? And what do you do with freedom once it's finally yours? Sometimes the loudest rebellion is a quiet porch and a carved eagle that never leaves. The sun was barely up when Wesley Boone rode into Larkspur Gulch, dust clinging to every crease of his coat blood, drying on the rope that dragged two lifeless men behind his horse. Folks stepped out of doorways, boots creaking on old wood planks, eyes narrowing as the horses clattered past. Some clapped, some whistled. The mayor stood on the saloon steps and doffed his hat like it was Sunday. "Boone," he called, "that's the Miller brothers, ain't it, Lord? You done it." Wesley didn't answer, just tipped his hat. Jaw set, eyes straight ahead. He tied the bodies to the hitch rail outside the sheriff's office and knocked twice. Sheriff Harlan Mathers opened the door with a sleepy grunt. "You're early," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck. Then he saw the bodies and straightened, like a rod had gone down his spine. "Well, hell. Wanted dead or alive," Wesley said, voice flat. "Figured dead's easier to carry." Harlan smirked, then waved the mayor over. A few townfolk gathered, murmuring about the bounty, the justice, the clean way it was done. But Wesley just stared at the dust swirling around his boots. He'd taken jobs like this before. Men who ran, men who shot first. But this one left a bitter taste in his mouth. "Come inside," Harlan said, patting his shoulder. "Payment's ready." Wesley followed, boots thudding slow on the warped floorboards. Inside, the sheriff opened a backroom door, revealing two girls huddled in the corner, barefoot wrists, chained eyes, wary. Twin girls. Maybe 16, 17 at most. Apache by the look of them. Wesley's brow furrowed. "What's this?" Harlan shrugged. "They were with the Millers. Spoils, I guess. Some folks from up north'll pay good coin for—" "Don't finish that sentence," Wesley said, voice low and sharp. The sheriff blinked. "Now look, they're part of the haul. Mayor says it's a bonus. You want your gold and the girls, or just the gold?" Wesley stepped forward, unholstered his knife, and cut the iron chain between the girls' wrists with two clean hacks. He handed the knife to one of them, palm first. "Keep it," he said. He didn't look at the sheriff, didn't say another word. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a piece of cornbread wrapped in linen, and placed it in the older twin's hand. She didn't blink, just clutched it like it was worth more than the coin purse on the table. "Y'all are coming with me," he said, "if you want to." The younger girl looked to her sister, then both nodded once, slow but certain. Harlan's voice followed them out the door. "Boone, you're stirring up things better left buried, but—" Wesley didn't answer. He mounted his horse. The girls followed on foot close behind, eyes still shadowed, but shoulders a little straighter. As they rode out past the town's edge, whispers trailed them like wind in dead grass. "You see, that Boone's gone soft. He'll bring trouble, maybe." But Wesley Boone wasn't the kind to weigh peace against what was right. Not anymore. By sundown, they reached the low ridge where his ranch sat quiet and wind-worn. The barn leaned a little west. The corral had one mule and two tired steers, and the house was more patch than paint. But it was clean. It was safe. He gave them the stable loft, for now set out bowls of stew and left them be. No questions, no lectures, just silence and warm bread. And long after the sun dipped, as Wesley sat on the porch sharpening his blade, he heard a sound from the stable, soft and strange. A hum, low and trembling. The kind a mother might use to hush a fevered child. He looked toward the dark barn and said nothing. But he felt it. Something small, something fragile was beginning to grow. The next morning, frost lingered on the fence posts like silver breath frozen in place. Wesley was already up splitting kindling behind the barn when he saw movement near the loft ladder. One of the twins, he couldn't tell which, yet climbed down barefoot, blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. She didn't speak. Just moved slow toward the pump, drew water with effort, and splashed her face like she'd done it 1,000 times. Wesley nodded once. "Coffee's on the stove, if you want it." No answer. But 10 minutes later, both girls sat on the porch step, steaming tin cups in their hands. They drank in silence, eyes sweeping the land. A hawk circled high above the cottonwoods near the creek. The only sound was the wind scraping dry grass and the rhythmic creak of Wesley oiling his saddle. He didn't ask names, didn't offer his. He figured they'd speak when they were ready or not at all. The world had taken enough from them already without him reaching in to pry. By noon, they were feeding the chickens and brushing down the mule, not because he told them to, but because they saw him doing it and followed. No fuss, no hesitation, just quiet work. He found himself watching them more than he meant to. The older one, he thought her name might be Nessa, moved with a careful strength, like someone used to waiting for the next blow. The younger Luma maybe carved circles in the dirt with a stick as she worked, not idle, but restless, like her hands needed to shape something to keep still. After supper, beans, bread, and a jar of sweet pickles from last fall, they lingered near the porch, not close, but not hiding either. The air was cool and clean, the kind that smelled like coming rain. Wesley lit his pipe. "You're welcome to the stable till we can set up something better. Got spare lumber in the shed." Still no answer, just two nods, barely there, but there. Inside the house, he set down his tools and looked out the window. The girls were still sitting under the porch awning, their feet tucked up, arms wrapped around their knees. Luma's eyes followed a moth as it danced around the lantern. That's when the knock came, hard and familiar. Wesley opened the door to see Colton Mays grinning like a fox with blood on its chin. His hat was too clean, his spurs too shiny, and his eyes didn't match his smile. "Well, I'll be," Colton drawled. "Heard you brought back the Miller boys. Didn't know you were starting a boarding school, too." Wesley didn't flinch. "You're trespassing." Colton stepped forward, boots on the porch. "Word is you took in those little rewards. Funny kind of payment boon, risking a noose for 2 strays. They're not strays. Then what are they?" Family Colton's voice dipped low. "Careful who you protect, Wes. Some of us still remember where you came from." Wesley stared hard. "And I remember who you are." Colton's smile faded just a hair. "Well, I'll be watching. Town's got ears, and not everyone's keen on charity." As Colton rode off, dust rising behind him like smoke from a slow fire, Wesley exhaled through his nose. He'd known that visit was coming. Colton never liked loose ends, and these girls had been his next transaction. That night, Wesley nailed a second lock to the barn door. Not because he feared shadows, but because sometimes danger didn't ride in shooting. Sometimes it knocked, smiled, and rode off with a plan. As he reached to douse the lantern, a sound reached him, soft, almost mist. A hum, same as the night before. But now he knew it was Nessa. A lullaby in a tongue older than the fence posts. And this time Luma added a whistle beneath it, like wind in pine. They didn't speak words yet, but they were beginning to sing. 3 days after Colton's visit, Wesley rose before dawn and saddled his mare in silence. He told the girls he'd be back before sundown, left a pot of beans warming on the hearth, and rode off with a bedroll, a shovel, and no clear destination spoken aloud. But he had one in mind. About 8 miles north of Larkspur Gulch, past Dead Horse Ridge, lay the old mesquite flat where Colton Mays used to make camp between jobs. Not near town, not near folks, just far enough to do whatever didn't want watching. Wesley had known Colton for too long not to suspect the worst. They had ridden together once years back, before Wesley soured on bounty work that blurred too many lines. Colton had learned to make money in the shadows, and he liked it there. By mid-morning, Wesley reached the flat. The fire pit was cold, half covered in ash. A few glass bottles littered the ground, and what looked like a broken bridle hung off a low limb. He tied his mare to a creosote bush and moved slow, scanning the site. Near the blackened coals tucked behind a rock, he found a burned satchel leather, peeled from fire buckle, warped. Most of what was inside had been ruined, but one corner of a ledger survived, pages scorched, but legible. He pulled it free, unfolded it careful as scripture. Names, initials, dates, numbers. A list of bounties, some familiar, some crossed out. And besides several strange annotations, +2 AP, 1 CH hold for JG. It took a minute. Then it hit him. AP, Apache, CH, Cheyenne, JG, maybe a buyer. This wasn't a kill log. It was inventory. Wesley's throat tightened, his jaw locked. There, halfway down the page, was a note Miller Hall 2 AP twins hold not listed. The girls weren't part of any legal reward. They were part of a side deal. Stolen. Meant to be sold. He didn't shout, didn't curse, just folded the page, tucked it inside his vest, and buried the rest of the ledger under a pile of rocks along with the satchel. Not to erase it, just to keep others from sniffing around if he failed to stop this clean. Back at the ranch, the sun was dipping when he returned. The girls had fed the mule-drawn water, and even swept the porch. Luma had etched a hawk into the dirt beside the well wings, wide talons forward. Wesley slid off his horse and gave a nod. "Good day," he asked like it was normal, like their world wasn't teetering. Nessa tilted her head, then handed him a rag for his hands. He took it with a quiet thanks. That night after supper, Wesley opened the wooden chest beneath his bed. Inside was a tin box bent at the corners, locked with an old clasp. He placed the ledger page inside next to a deed to his land, a photograph of his mother, and a letter from a war buddy long buried near El Paso. He locked the chest, slid it back under the bed, and exhaled slow. Now, he wasn't just offering shelter. Now he had proof of a crime, of Colton's dealings, and of how close the girls had come to disappearing forever. The next morning, the girls helped mend the chicken coop. Nessa worked without pause, sleeves rolled past her elbows. Luma carved a small pony from firewood scraps, smoothing its mane with a pocket knife. Wesley watched her from the porch, coffee in hand. She didn't flinch when he met her gaze this time. Instead, she held up the carving. "For you," she said softly. His heart caught, not from the gift, but from the sound, her voice, clear and steady. He stepped down, took the carving, and nodded once. "Thank you." She pointed at the pony's back. Carved into it, tiny but neat, was a single feather. "Means safe," she said. He turned toward the ridge beyond the barn. Safe wasn't a word he could promise, not with Colton still grinning in town, but he'd die trying to make it true. The Larkspur Gulch Spring Rodeo arrived like clockwork last Saturday of April, just before the river thawed and the cottonwoods leafed out. By sunup, the town square bustled with wagons, hats, and the smell of frying dough. Ribbons fluttered from porch rails. Children darted between booths, and the sheriff, newly shaven and trying hard to appear useful, patrolled with 2 deputies like the town needed guarding from joy. Wesley Boone hadn't planned a show, but Luma had carved a new set of figures, eagles, ponies, bears, and Nessa had whispered they might trade for food. It wasn't a plea, just a fact, but Wesley heard the rest. They wanted to be seen as something besides shadows in a barn. He hitched the wagon and loaded the crate without a word. Their booth was simple, a borrowed table near the feed store, a borrowed tarp overhead. Luma set the carvings out in neat rows. Nessa sat quiet behind them, braiding straw as her eyes scanned every stranger that passed. Wesley leaned against a post nearby, arms crossed, watching the town watch them. Some folks paused. A few even smiled. "Did you make these?" Sweetheart asked a woman in a bonnet holding up a fox figurine. Luma nodded once. The woman pressed a coin into her palm. "Then you keep the change." By midday, they'd traded for jerky, a sack of flour, and a new tin cup. Luma even gave away a wolf to a boy with no shoes. When Wesley arched a brow at her, she shrugged. He needed it. Wesley didn't argue. But not all eyes were kind. From across the square, Colton Mays leaned against the judge's rail, chewing a matchstick, and grinning like he smelled smoke before anyone else. His shirt was pressed, his boots shined. He'd just won the bronc event, and the crowd still buzzed with his name. Wesley kept his distance. He didn't want trouble, not here, not yet. But trouble came anyway. It started as a whisper, a snide voice near the booth. "Property shouldn't be on display." Wesley turned. The man was in his 40s, red-faced and squat, with a silver badge that marked him as Deputy James Rudd. He looked down at Nessa like she was a sack of grain left in the sun too long. "She got permission to be here?" he asked, loud enough for others to hear. Wesley stepped forward, slow and calm. "She doesn't need permission to breathe," Rudd sneered. "You're forgetting who keeps this town safe, Boone." Wesley's voice didn't rise. "You weren't there when those girls were chained in your sheriff's office. Maybe your kind of safety don't mean much." Rudd stepped closer. "They're not citizens." Wesley didn't move. "They're human." Rudd scoffed, then turned to walk off, but not before muttering, "You'll regret this." Wesley's hand moved before he thought, not to his gun, just to Rudd's shoulder. Firm, stopping him mid-stride. "Say it again," Wesley said low. Rudd spun, puffed up like a wet rooster. "What? That you're keeping stolen blood on your porch?" That's when Wesley hit him. One clean punch, nothing flashy, just honest. Rudd staggered, fell backward into the dirt, stunned more by the silence than the blow. No one moved. The judge stepped out from his booth, eyes narrowed. Colton stepped forward too, but didn't speak. Wesley turned to the crowd. Anyone want to call them property again? No one answered. He didn't smile, didn't tip his hat, just walked back to the booth, helped Nessa gather the carvings, and nodded toward the wagon. The girls followed without a word. Back at the ranch after the sun had dipped low, Wesley found something tucked under his saddle blanket. A small eagle, wings stretched, claws sharp, newer than the rest. He looked toward the barn where a soft hum threaded through the cracks in the wood. He couldn't promise they'd be safe. But he knew now they weren't afraid to be seen, and the town had just learned what kind of fight that could start. 2 days after the rodeo, Wesley woke to a strange weight on his saddle. It wasn't much a small, carved eagle, no bigger than a palm tucked beneath the stirrup leather. The wings were spread wide, the claws detailed with care, and carved beneath its belly was a single word in blocky, unsure script: watch. Wesley held it in his hand a long while, thumb brushing the grain. It wasn't Luma's work. Her carvings were finer, more fluid. This one was raw, deliberate. A warning, not a gift. He tucked it into his coat pocket and looked toward the barn where the girls were sweeping feed into troughs, sunlight catching in their braids. Nothing seemed off, but he knew better than to trust daylight. That afternoon he rode into town to send the copy of Colton's ledger page. He didn't take the main road. Instead, he used the old trail through Dry Rock Pass and brought the page to a man he trusted, Cal Weaver, the courier at the mail depot, who once served with Wesley's brother during the war. "I need this to get to Santa Fe," Wesley said, handing over the sealed envelope. "Direct to the federal marshal's office. Not a soul else." Cal nodded solemn. "You sure you want to stir that pot?" Wesley gave a thin smile. Already did. He rode back slower, watching the shadows. He saw nothing, heard nothing, until night fell. It was Luma's scream that split the air. Wesley flew from bed, grabbing the rifle by the door and bolting barefoot into the yard. Flames were already licking up the side of the barn orange against black sky smoke, curling thick and angry. The livestock bucked and kicked in panic. Sparks rained from the hayloft like stars gone mad. Nessa was dragging buckets from the pump. Luma beat at flames with a wet grain sack. Neither hesitated. Wesley didn't shout. He just moved. He kicked open the barn door, yanked the mule's halter loose, laid 2 cows out blind through the smoke. The chickens fluttered in a frenzy, some already coughing in the rafters. By the time the last sheep stumbled free, the east wall collapsed in a burst of sparks. Half the hay was gone, but the barn still stood barely. The fire hadn't reached the tack or the grain stores. A miracle, or maybe just stubborn wood. They sat on the ground afterwards, soaked and shaking. Wesley coughed into his elbow lungs, raw. He looked at the girls. "Either of you see anyone?" Nessa shook her head, jaw clenched. But Luma raised a hand, then slowly pointed toward the ridge. "A man," she whispered. "Horse, no lantern." Wesley's chest tightened. He stood, walked into the house, and unlocked the chest beneath his bed. He took the original ledger page and a written report he'd scrawled out that morning. Every detail he could recall from Colton's scorched ledger, the coded initials, the names, and slid both into a fresh envelope. He sealed it, marked it again for Santa Fe, then stepped outside and handed it to Nessa. "Another ride to town tomorrow," he said. "Same courier. Don't let it leave your hands till Cal takes it." She nodded, eyes fierce beneath soot-smudged cheeks. Inside, Wesley cleaned the rifle, oiled the barrel, not for show, just preparation, the kind that settled a man's nerves more than prayer. That night, sleep didn't come easy. The girls stayed in the main house first time. He set up cots near the hearth, kept the lantern low. Outside, the wind blew smoke over the valley, masking everything but tension. He sat on the porch, the carved eagle in hand. It wasn't just a symbol now, it was a message. They were being watched, and someone wanted to make sure they never saw morning. The morning after the fire smelled like ash and betrayal. Smoke still clung to the air around Wesley's ranch, though the flames had died and the girls were safe. He'd barely slept, kept his rifle across his lap and his boots on, just in case. By sunrise, Nessa rode to town with the second envelope. Wesley watched her disappear down the trail, her spine straight as a fence post. She didn't speak when she left. She didn't need to. Wesley and Luma stayed behind to clear the barn. Blackened beams sagged like tired arms. What hadn't burned now reeked of smoke and fear. But they worked bucket by bucket, no complaints. Just before noon, the sound of hooves cut through the valley. 4 riders. Uniform. Deputies. Wesley didn't flinch. He wiped his hands on a rag and stood still as the sheriff dismounted. Sheriff Harlan Mathers looked 10 years older than the last time Wesley had seen him. Sweat clung to his collar. His eyes didn't meet Wesley's. "Wes," he said, voice tight. "You're under arrest." Loomis stepped behind Wesley without a word. He didn't move, for what he asked. The sheriff shifted. Harboring fugitives, assault on a deputy, and perjury. "Perjury," Wesley echoed. "You mean the report I filed about Colton's dealings?" The sheriff swallowed. "You've stirred up more trouble than you realize. Folks are scared. Things are delicate." Wesley raised an eyebrow. "So now truth is trouble." Harlan didn't answer, just motioned for the deputies. One of them, younger and looking too green to know better, stepped forward with iron cuffs. Wesley didn't resist. He handed his rifle to Luma gently, like passing off something sacred. "Lock the door at night," he told her. "Don't answer knocks." She nodded, lower lip trembling, but held firm. As they rode into town, shackles rattling against his saddle, Wesley kept his eyes forward. The valley opened before him, but he knew what waited behind. Fear, power, and a man like Colton who had grown too bold. Larkspur Gulch was quieter than usual when they arrived. The rodeo banners were still up, faded now like the celebration had turned into a hangover no one wanted to admit. Folks watched from porches and shop windows, eyes darting, some ashamed, some curious. They put Wesley in the back cell, the one near the stove that didn't burn hot anymore. Harlan offered him a cot, but he stayed on his feet. "You're making a mistake," Wesley said. Harlan rubbed his temples. "I ain't got a choice. You always got a choice." The door clanged shut. That was the end of it for the sheriff, anyway. A few hours later, a soft knock came at the back wall. Wesley turned. Still stubborn, I see, came a voice he hadn't heard in years. "Chaska." Wesley moved to the bars, heart tight. Chaska stood on the far side of the corridor, arms folded, his braids flecked with dust, and his eyes sharp as ever. "You wrote Santa Fe," he said. Wesley nodded. "Did the courier make it?" Chaska smiled faintly. "He did. I was already there." Wesley stepped closer. "And they read the report. They saw the copy of the ledger. They know about Colton." Wesley exhaled slow. "That enough to bring them?" Chaska leaned in. "They're on their way. Marshal Barrett, Judge Holcomb, and 2 witnesses from Lincoln County. How long?" 3 days, maybe 2 if the weather holds." Wesley nodded once. "That might be too late." Chaska's voice lowered, then stall. "And trust the girls." That night, Wesley sat on the edge of the cot, hands resting on his knees. The cell was cold. The town was silent. But somewhere out there, the truth was riding toward him. And when it arrived, it wouldn't be quiet. 3 days passed. Rain threatened, but never came. Clouds hovered like silent jurors waiting to pass sentence. Wesley stayed behind bars calm but coiled, watching the town from the narrow window of his cell. He counted footsteps outside, listened to how long the deputies lingered, how the sheriff stopped saying soon when he brought meals. And on the 3rd morning, just after sunrise, he heard it. Hooves. 4 sets. He stood. A few minutes later, the front door opened and didn't shut for a long while. Voices followed, sharp ones, official ones. Wesley recognized none of them until the last Chaska's. The sheriff came back with a pale look on his face and said, "Boone, you got visitors. They didn't bother with the cell." Marshal Barrett, a broad man with a worn coat and eyes like river stones, took one look and said, "He walks free. Now." The sheriff fumbled with the keys. Behind the marshal came Judge Holcomb, thin gray-haired spectacles on a cord, and 2 others Wesley didn't expect: a blacksmith from Lincoln and a merchant's widow. Both had missing daughters. Both had known Colton Mays. In the meeting hall, word spread fast. The benches filled. Some came to watch. Some came to side with Colton. And some weren't sure anymore. Colton arrived late, freshly shaved, wearing a pressed shirt and smirking like he'd already won. He carried a paper in hand, a folded contract. "This here proves I was assigned those girls by writ of trade," he declared, lifting the page high. The judge adjusted his spectacles. By whom? Colton hesitated. The Millers. Before they died. Convenient, the judge said flatly. The marshal stood. Let the record show the ledger provided by Mr. Boone. He held up Wesley's copy. Details a pattern of unauthorized capture and sale of native women. This includes initials matching Colton Mays and direct reference to 2 unlisted Apache twins. Murmurs rolled through the room. Wesley remained seated, hands folded. He didn't smile. He didn't look at Colton. The judge turned. Is anyone here able to confirm the identity or origin of these girls? Silence. Then footsteps. Soft. Measured. Nessa walked forward. The courtroom stilled. She didn't speak right away. She stepped up beside Wesley, placed a small carving on the table. A bear, rough but powerful. She took a breath. We are not cargo, she said. Her voice was steady, clear. We were taken in the night. Our mother was gone. The miller said we were property. Mr. Boone gave us bread, gave us a name, not his, ours. Luma appeared beside her, gripping her hand. The judge nodded slowly. That's enough, child. Barrett stood again. We've seen enough. I have orders from Santa Fe to detain Colton Mays for transport, on charges of trafficking, arson, and conspiracy to defraud. Colton's smirk died. 2 marshals stepped behind him, and for the first time his boots seemed unsure where to land. I didn't do nothing, he snapped. You did plenty, Barrett said. And you'll explain it to a jury under oath. As they dragged him out, Colton turned to the crowd. You're next, he spat toward Wesley. But the words had no weight anymore. The town didn't cheer, didn't clap. But they didn't protest either. That silence, the one Wesley had learned to live with, now turned its face. And as the gavel fell and the judge stood to leave, Wesley remained at the bench, eyes not on Colton, but on the 2 girls beside him. Still standing, still free. Outside, the sky finally opened, and a soft rain began to fall. No thunder, no lightning, just the quiet breaking of something long held shut. Colton Mays didn't go quietly. As the marshals led him through the doors of the Larkspur Gulch meeting hall, his voice cracked like a whip against the uneasy hush. You think this town's better off without me, without order, without someone willing to do what the rest of you won't? He jerked against the cuffs. I kept the peace. I brought in killers. I did the dirty work. But no one stepped forward to agree, not even the sheriff. Sheriff Mathers stood in the back hat in his hands, eyes low. He didn't say a word. Just watched as the man he once called a necessary evil was hauled out into the drizzle. The townsfolk filtered out slowly. No cheers, just heavy boots on wet wood. A few looked Wesley's way, then turned quickly like eye contact might pull them into something they weren't ready to face. Only one approached. A woman, late 30s, maybe 40, apron-stained boots scuffed. Wesley remembered her from the rodeo she'd been selling biscuits near the general store. She walked up to Nessa and Luma, hands wringing a damp kerchief. I didn't know, she said. Or maybe I didn't want to. The girls said nothing, but they didn't turn away. The woman cleared her throat. I teach letters at the church school. If you ever want a place to learn or to teach, I'd be proud to have you both. Wesley watched Nessa glance up. Her expression was unreadable. Then, slow as sunrise, she gave a small nod. The woman smiled, eyes glistening, and stepped back into the crowd. Inside, Judge Holcomb packed his satchel, while Marshal Barrett signed off on the custody order for Colton's transfer. You staying in town? Barrett asked Wesley. Wesley shook his head. I've got a barn to rebuild. Barrett tucked the paper away. If you ever feel like turning in that badge I hear you used to wear, there's work in Santa Fe. Wesley gave a dry chuckle. I reckon I've done enough work for now. Holcomb looked up. Mr. Boone, not many men would have done what you did. Fewer still would have stayed after. I didn't do it for applause, Wesley said. No, Holcomb replied, but you did it anyway. That's what matters. Back at the ranch, the valley was quiet again. The girls rode ahead. Luma balanced on the wagon seat, her braid catching drops of rain. Nessa sat in the back, sorting through what was left of the carvings. Most had survived. Some were scorched. All of them, Wesley knew, meant more now than they ever had before. He stepped down from the saddle and stretched. The barn smelled of char and wet earth, but it stood, and that was enough for now. By evening, they had moved the animals back in, threw blankets over the loft floor again. For the first time in weeks, there was no watching, no chasing, no threat waiting just beyond the trees. Wesley sat on the porch while the girls cleaned the supper dishes. The sky was bruised with clouds, but holding its peace. The wind, once sharp with ash, now smelled of sage and soaked dirt. Luma joined him quietly, setting a new carving in his lap without a word. A raven this time, wings folded beak, pointed toward the ground like it was listening to something only it could hear. He turned it over. On the base carved in small, careful letters, "Still here." He looked at her. "Is that for me?" She nodded. He tucked the carving into his coat pocket right beside the eagle. "I didn't save you," he said, voice low. "You saved yourselves." "I just opened the gate," Luma smiled. "Still counts." Behind them, Nessa lit the lantern inside. Its glow poured out warm across the porch and onto the wet grass. The storm had passed, but the truth that was still echoing through Larkspur Gulch, louder than any gunfire ever could. Spring came late to Larkspur Gulch that year. Snow held to the ridge until mid-May, and the river swelled heavier than it had in a decade. But the town moved on as small towns do. Folks stopped whispering when the girls walked by. Some even waved. The old gossip at the Mercantile now spoke of rainfall and calving season, not Apache twins or burned-down barns. Wesley Boone kept to himself, rebuilt the roof, slat by slat, hauled water until the new pump came in, replaced the hinges on the barn door twice before he finally got them right. The girls didn't leave, but they didn't stay hidden either. Some afternoons, Nessa would ride into town with carved goods wrapped in cloth and a list of supplies written in a tidy hand. She traded fairly spoke soft and never lingered. Luma, meanwhile, took to sitting on the porch with a pile of scrap pine and her little carving blade. She worked, quiet eyes flicking up now and then, like she was still listening for danger, but finally believed it might not come. One morning, as the grass turned green again, a letter arrived. The courier didn't bring it in person, just tied it to the gate and rode off like it was nothing special. But Wesley saw the seal Santa Fe. He carried it inside and opened it slow, sitting at the table where the girls now ate breakfast every morning, where the carved pony Luma gave him still stood like a silent guardian. He read the letter twice, then a third time slower. When the girls came in from feeding the animals, he looked up. Nessa noticed his face first. "What is it?" Wesley tapped the letter once. "It's from Judge Holcomb." Luma leaned over his shoulder, eyes scanning the lines. "They've set up a new education grant," Wesley said, "for girls displaced by territorial violence. Schools, housing, safety, all of it." He slid the letter toward them. "They want someone to help teach, someone who's lived it." Nessa's brow furrowed. "Me, you," he said, voice quiet. "Both of you if you want." Luma looked to her sister. Nessa looked to Wesley. "We'd leave the ranch?" He nodded once. "You could stay," Nessa said, "or come with us." Wesley smiled faintly. "I ain't much for cities, and somebody's got to keep these chickens from starving." They didn't answer right away. The next morning, the girls packed 2 satchels each. Simple things. A shawl, a journal, the last of the cornmeal. Luma slid 3 carvings into Wesley's hands before they rode a bear, a raven, and the eagle from weeks ago, now polished and dark with oil. "Keep these near the door," she said. He didn't argue, just nodded. At the gate, Nessa hesitated. Then she turned in the saddle. "You still don't talk much," she said. "Never have," she grinned. "But you listen." Wesley stepped forward, touched her bridle gently. "You were never mine to keep," he said, "only to shelter while the storm passed." And just like that, they rode off slow, steady, like folks who knew exactly where they were going. The next weeks passed quiet. Wesley kept working the land, fixing the garden rows, mending the coop. Nights were still. He slept lighter, missed their voices, missed the way the porch hummed with life, but he didn't wish them back. Not really. One afternoon, he set the carvings on the mantel, each one in line: the bear, for strength; the raven, for truth; the eagle, for freedom. He didn't tell the story much when folks asked, just gave a small shrug and said, "Some things ain't mine to explain." But when spring turned to summer and a fresh envelope arrived with wax-stamped blue, he didn't even wait to open it. Inside was a photograph, grainy but clear. Nessa standing at a blackboard, Luma holding a child's hand. Behind them, a schoolhouse newly built, Apache settler and Spanish children side by side. On the back, in Nessa's handwriting, "We carved something bigger. You gave us the wood." Wesley set the photo beside the eagle, and when someone knocked that night asking about the girls, he simply tipped his hat and said, "I just opened a gate. They did the rest."